Hey, Zach here, back with another Techno tutorial. Today we're going to talk to you about your Becker pump, what that'll come with, and how to set it up. When you do receive it, you're going to receive your pump already wired to the starter box in the larger box here, and then you'll have all the plumbing and gauge in the secondary box on top. Open up the box. Be careful not to press too hard with the knife and cut anything inside of the box. I'm going to find a thicker piece of cardboard directly on top of the pump here, so we can just get that out, discard that. So bagged up inside your box is going to be your pump here, and wired to that is going to be the starter box. When we're lifting this pump out of this box, you're going to have to pull back the bag, and that'll expose these hooks here that we can use to lift this up and get it in place. Make sure when you're prepping the pump to be lifted out of the box that you're removing any of this excess cardboard, packaging, anything like that. And if you'd like, if it makes it easier when you're doing this, you can cut at the corners of the box, and that way you get yourself a little bit more room to lift it out. And also, you want to be mindful of your starter box that is wired to the pump. So when you're lifting and stuff like that, make sure that that is secure. And then we're ready to hook up our chains to the eyelets. We'll bring in our fork and we'll lift it up. All right, so you can hook your chains in here on each of your eyelets, and then we'll move the forklift in under the chains and we can lift it up just like that. All right, now that we have the pump lifted out of the box, we can take the bag completely off, and we can remove any of the plugs here on the intake and the exhaust. At this point, you can move the machine into location wherever you want it to be. And if you'd like, you can set it directly down onto the floor, or you can use the pallet that came with it, take this box off and set it right back down on the pallet. That way you can get a floor jack under there and move it around a little bit easier for yourself instead of having to pick it up every time with the chains. Once you have your pump in place, you're going to mount your starter box to the wall. There's 3 mounting holes inside there. You'll have to open up the case using a flathead screwdriver, and you can find the screw right here at the bottom of the starter box. Now that you have your starter box mounted to the wall, you're going to need to have your licensed electrician wire in 3-phase 220 volt 40 amp power, and you're going to wire that to the top of the relay in here to L1, 2, and 3, and then you'll wire your ground to the indicated ground screw inside of the starter box. All right, before putting the pump into operation, we're going to have to check the rotation direction, and we're going to do that by quickly turning on and off the pump and then checking the rotation direction. You can turn your pump on and off here at the starter box. The green button here will turn it on, and the red button will turn it off. Make sure your pump is rotating in the correct direction. Check the rotation sticker here, and then you can look inside of either this grate here or the one right here on the front. And when you do it, you're just going to press power on just for a second, on and off, and then check for rotation. If you notice that it is rotating the opposite direction, to correct this, you'll just have to swap 2 legs of power inside of the starter box where your licensed electrician wired power, and then check again. Here we have the box with all the plumbing for the machine, so we can take that out, unbox everything. We have this already mostly put together for you, but you will have to take each piece one by one apart, or at least I recommend one at a time, put some plumbing tape on it, and then put it back together the way that it is here. That way you already have it, you don't have to worry about how to put it together exactly. So let's get that done. All right, now that we have all of our plumbing unpacked, we're gonna have to go one by one to each joint on the plumbing and put our plumbing tape on the threads, and that way we get an airtight seal and we don't lose any of our vacuum pressure when we do use that pump. So one at a time, we're gonna unscrew, get our Teflon tape. You wanna make sure you wrap the plumbing tape at least halfway down the threads. All right, now that we've got the plumbing tape at each of our joints here, we can assemble that onto the machine. So you're gonna take your first piece here, we're gonna thread that on right there. But a tip to do that is to just take this end piece, turn that 90 degrees. And that way it doesn't hit into any other components on the pump while you thread this one in place. All right, make sure you tighten that down nice and good. And then we can tighten this one back. 90 degrees down. At this point, we can put our canister. And then lastly, we're going to secure our pump fittings to our canister. You may have gotten a T fitting with 2 hose connections, or you may have just gotten a straight fitting for 1. Your CNC machine will either have 1 or 2 vacuum hoses coming off of it, and that's the reason for the difference. Nice and snug. All right. And you'll connect your vacuum hoses from your machine right to each end here. Here we have our gauge. We're going to connect that to the reducer at the opposite end of our plumbing setup here. All right. Now that we've got our pump all set up, our electrician wired power, we hooked up all our plumbing, we checked that the pump is rotating the proper direction. We can test the vacuum pressure by what's called deadheading the pump. You can take some pieces of wood, scrap, whatever you have, and that way we can turn the pump on and we'll close off each end of our vacuum, and then we can check our gauge and make sure that we're reaching about 20 inches of mercury. And that concludes today's Becker pump tutorial. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next video.